The waterfall was gone now, diverted by mining operations decades ago, but the cave entrance remained hidden behind a tangle of dead vegetation and rusted machinery. Kaela picked her way through the debris, her enhanced vision cutting through the darkness as she descended into the tunnel system. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, yet transformed by time's patient decay. The ancient machinery still hummed with power, drawing energy from geothermal taps that had outlasted civilizations. But now, thick roots had grown through cracks in the walls, their pale tendrils seeking moisture in the perpetual dampness. The air tasted of metal and ash, centuries of war dust settling into every crevice. Water dripped steadily from limestone formations, each drop echoing in the hollow spaces like a countdown to eternity. Deep in the heart of the complex, where the cave narrowed to a natural cathedral of stone and shadow, the cryopod waited among the mineral deposits and fallen rocks. Its status lights blinked steadily, a technological beacon in the primitive darkness. Kaela's hand shook as she input the revival sequence, her breath forming small clouds in the cold, damp air. She told herself this moment would never come, that the secret would die with her, but the war had escalated beyond anything she'd imagined, and her people were fracturing under the pressure. They needed someone who could remind them what they were fighting for. The pod cycled through its wake-up protocols, atmosphere returning to normal parameters, preservation mist vented through filters clogged with centuries of cave dust and debris. Slowly, like a resurrection from some ancient myth, Alex began to stir. His eyes snapped open with the violent suddenness of a soldier waking to enemy fire. In one fluid motion, his hand shot out to where his sidearm should have been, finding only empty air. The confusion in his eyes turned to raw panic as the unfamiliar surroundings registered. The dripping stone walls, the mineral formations, the shadows that moved in the flickering pod light. "Contact," he shouted, the word torn from his throat in a voice cracked by centuries of silence. He tried to roll out of the pod, muscles responding with the desperate efficiency of battlefield training, despite their long dormancy. Kaela stepped back, her own panic rising as she saw him struggle. She reached out with trembling hands, shaking his shoulders desperately. "Alex," she whispered, her voice cracked with fear. "They found us." But he wasn't seeing her, not really. His eyes were wide and wild, seeing not the sterile chamber but the smoke and fire of his last moments. "Martinez, Rodriguez, fall back to secondary positions." His voice broke on the names of the dead comrades who had died screaming while he lay bleeding beneath that beam. "Alex, look at me." Kaela shook him harder, her composure cracking. "You have to focus. They found us." The memories hit him like physical blows, the taste of his own blood, the weight of failure, the fury at enemies who fought without honor. His hands shook as phantom pain shot through his legs, the echo of bones that had been crushed 2.5 centuries ago. Slowly, agonizingly, his vision began to clear. The face above him came into focus, older, scarred, marked by time and war, but unmistakably the same blue-skinned soldier who had stood over him on that battlefield so long ago. Recognition dawned slowly. His gaze focused on Kaela's face, the panic fading, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "Valerin," his voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "You should have finished me." Each word was measured, precise, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Why didn't you finish me?" Kaela met his gaze, seeing her own reflection in his eyes. Older, scarred, marked by centuries of choices she could never unmake. "Because," she said finally, "sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the right thing to do." He was still wearing his tattered armor, the blast scoring and impact marks telling the story of his last battle. But underneath the damage, Kaela could see the precision engineering, the technological sophistication that had made human forces so formidable. Even after all these years, his equipment was superior to most of what her people could field. "You saved me," Alex said, the statement carrying weight beyond its simple words. Kaela met his gaze, seeing her own reflection in his eyes. Older, scarred, marked by centuries of conflict. "I betrayed everything for you. Now I need that betrayal to matter." She led him through the tunnels, explaining the current situation as they walked. The Valerins were caught in a three-way war, between the outer colony expansion, internal rebels who wanted to surrender, and hardliners who believed only total victory could save their species. Cities were falling daily, refugee camps stretched across 3 continents, and at the center of it all, a new ruler who demanded absolute obedience and spoke of final solutions. "The world you see now isn't the one you left," Kaela said as they emerged from the caves into the harsh light of an alien dawn. "Everything's changed. The technology, the politics, the very reason we're fighting." Alex stood silently for a long moment, taking in the devastated landscape in the distance. Orbital bombardment platforms traced lazy arcs across the sky, their weapons arrays pointed downward like the fingers of some wrathful god. Closer to hand, the remnants of what had once been forest stretched toward the horizon. Black, skeletal remains that spoke of chemical weapons and ecological warfare. The crimson sky rained ash over the battlefield, each flake a funeral shroud for the countless dead scattered across the scarred landscape. The war had raged for 3 years, and this godforsaken planet had become a graveyard where 2 species had perfected the art of mutual destruction. Kaela's azure skin was streaked with dirt and alien blood. Her breathing was labored as she picked her way through the carnage. Her people called this place the Convergence, where the human colony ships had first made planetfall, where first contact had devolved into first blood. Now, it was simply where everything came to die. She found him pinned beneath a collapsed beam, his human armor cracked and leaking some kind of medical fluid. The warrior's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, his pale skin flushed with fever. By all rights, she should have put her blade through his heart and moved on. The war demanded it. Her commanders expected it. Her people needed it. But something in his face stopped her, not weakness, but a kind of stubborn defiance, even in defeat. His eyes, when they focused on her, held no fear, only a weary acceptance that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "Go ahead," he whispered, his voice rough with pain and smoke inhalation. "Finish it." Kaela's hand tightened on her weapon's grip. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to grant his request. Instead, she found herself hauling the beam off his legs, her enhanced strength making quick work of the debris. "What are you doing, Alex?" she muttered, slinging his arm over her shoulder. "Something stupid," she added, half to herself. "There's a cave system 2 clicks north, old mining tunnels. If you want to live, you'll shut up and help me get you there." The journey was a nightmare of hidden patrols and shifting terrain. Alex's leg was badly broken, and every few hundred meters, he'd stumble, biting back groans that would have given away their position. Kaela found herself admiring his discipline, even as she questioned her own sanity. The cave entrance was hidden behind a waterfall that had run red with iron oxide for centuries. Inside, the tunnels branched into a labyrinth that had been abandoned since before the war began. Deep in the heart of the system, Kaela found what she was looking for, an old emergency shelter, complete with a functioning cryopod. "Why?" Alex asked as she helped him into the chamber. His eyes were glassy with blood loss, but his gaze remained sharp. "Why save an enemy?" Kaela's fingers hesitated over the activation controls. Her people would call it treason. Her family would disown her. Everything she'd fought for, everything she believed in, would be branded as lies the moment anyone discovered what she'd done. "Because," she said finally, sealing the pod's entry hatch, "maybe someday the war will end, and when it does, someone should remember that we were capable of more than just killing each other." She initiated the cryo sequence, watching as the chamber filled with preservation mist. Alex's eyes found hers through the frosting viewplate, and she pressed her palm against the glass. "If they find you, I die," she whispered to his sleeping form. "But if they don't, wake up someday and fight beside me." The pod hummed to life, joining the ancient chorus of machinery that would keep him suspended between life and death. Kaela sealed the chamber entrance, erasing every trace of their passage. Then she walked back into the war, carrying a secret that would either damn her or save them all. She never spoke of that day, not when her commanders decorated her for valor in the subsequent battles, not when the ceasefire finally came, fragile and bitter, nor when the years passed and the fragile peace crumbled into Cold War, then proxy conflicts, then something worse. Kaela disappeared from history the same way she disappeared into those tunnels, quietly leaving only questions behind. 250 years later, the planet looked like it was dying. Kaela stood at the edge of what had once been New Sanctuary, watching the city burn in the distance. The blue-white flames of plasma bombardment lit the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the wasteland that stretched between her and her destination. Her people, the Valerins, were on the brink of total collapse, caught between the advancing outer colony fleets and a civil war that had torn their society apart. She looked older now, the angular perfection of her features marked by scars and a weariness that went bone deep. Her armor was patched and repatched, bearing the scratches of 100 battles, but her eyes still held the same stubborn defiance that had made her save a dying human centuries ago. The path to the caves was treacherous, made worse by the automated defense grids that both sides had scattered across the landscape. Kaela moved like a ghost through the ruins, avoiding the hunter-killer drones that swept the area in regular patterns. The war had evolved, become more precise and infinitely more deadly. As she approached the familiar terrain, memories crashed over her like a tide she'd held back for centuries. 250 years ago, the same path, but then she'd been carrying dead weight, a dying human soldier whose name she didn't even know. Blood seeping through her fingers as she half-dragged, half-carried him through the smoke and ash. The cave entrance had been hidden behind that same waterfall, the rush of iron-red water masking the sound of her passage. Inside, the tunnels had branched into darkness, but she'd known where to go. The old mining complex had been abandoned for decades. Even then, its emergency shelters forgotten by everyone except those desperate enough to seek them out. Deep in the heart of the system, among the dripping stalactites and mineral deposits that gleamed like frozen tears, she'd found the cryopod. Ancient technology, but still functional, still humming with patient power. Alex had been barely conscious as she'd sealed him inside, his blood painting crimson streaks on the chamber walls. The preservation mist had begun to fill the capsule, and his eyes, those same defiant eyes, had found hers through the frosting viewplate. If they return, she'd whispered, pressing her palm against the glass as the systems engaged, wake up and finish what I couldn't. Then she'd walk back into the war, carrying a secret that would either damn her or save them all. What do you need me to do? He asked finally. The question caught Kaela off guard. She'd expected anger, confusion, demands for explanations. Instead, he'd simply accepted the situation and offered his help. The pragmatic response of a soldier who understood that some battles were bigger than personal grievances. Help me reach the capital, she said. There are people there who still remember what we're supposed to be fighting for, but the route is complicated. Alex shouldered his weapon, checking the power cells with practiced efficiency. How complicated? Kaela's smile was grim, the kind that got you dead 6 different ways before breakfast. The first 3 days of our journey were a masterclass in tactical survival. The landscape between the caves and the capital had become a killing field, crisscrossed with automated defense networks, patrol routes, and the hunting grounds of scavenger bands from both species. Alex moved like a ghost through the ruins, his understanding of battlefield dynamics proving invaluable despite the technological advances. He guided them around sniper positions that Kaela would have walked straight into, identified ambush sites from terrain features that hadn't changed in centuries, and twice saved them from stepping into concealed minefields. The fundamentals never change, he explained during a rest stop in the ruins of what had once been a shopping complex. Cover, concealment, lines of fire, physics doesn't evolve. They were interrupted by the whine of approaching engines. Kaela pulled Alex deeper into the ruins as a patrol skimmer passed overhead, its sensors sweeping the area in methodical patterns. Through gaps in the rubble, she could see the Valerin crew, her own people, now hunting her as a traitor. Friends of yours, Alex whispered. Used to be, Kaela replied, her expression tight with pain. The commander of that squad trained me when I was a cadet. Now he has orders to bring me back dead or alive. The skimmer passed without detecting them, but its presence meant they were getting close to contested territory. From here on, they'd be hunted by both sides. Valerins who considered Kaela a traitor and human scavenger squads who would kill Alex on sight. The first real test came that evening when they stumbled into a 3-way firefight in the ruins of an old fortress. Human scavengers had occupied the central keep, while two Valerin squads were attempting to dislodge them from opposite sides. Kaela and Alex found themselves caught in the crossfire, with nowhere to run. "Follow my lead," Alex said, analyzing the tactical situation within human speed. "The humans are using suppression fire to keep your people pinned, but they've left their flanks exposed. They move through the ruins like dancers, each covering the other's advance." Alex's knowledge of human tactics let him predict their movements, while Kaela's understanding of Valerin doctrine kept them clear of the alien forces. Together, they carved a path through the chaos that neither could have managed alone. The fight ended when both squads exhausted their ammunition and withdrew, leaving the fortress empty except for the dead. Kaela and Alex picked their way through the carnage, salvaging what supplies they could find. "This is what the war has become," Kaela said, looking down at a young Valerin soldier who couldn't have been more than 20. "Children killing children over ruins that aren't worth defending." Alex knelt beside the body, closing the soldier's eyes with surprising gentleness. "Wars always end up eating their young. That's why they have to end." The second major engagement came 2 days later in a flooded bunker complex that had been abandoned since the early years of the conflict. The tunnels were partially submerged, forcing them to wade through chest-deep water that glowed with bioluminescent algae. Kaela led the way, her enhanced lung capacity allowing her to dive beneath barriers that would have stopped a human. They were halfway through the complex when the attack came. Human scavengers had set up an ambush in the deepest section, using the water as both concealment and a killing field. The first burst of gunfire sent Kaela diving for cover behind a half-submerged wall. "Can you see them?" Alex called out, his voice echoing strangely in the flooded space. "3 positions," Kaela replied, analyzing muzzle flashes. "They've got the exits covered." The firefight that followed was unlike anything in conventional warfare. Combatants dove and surfaced like deadly fish, using the water as 3-dimensional terrain. Alex proved surprisingly adaptable, using his armor's built-in rebreather to stay submerged for minutes at a time, while he flanked the enemy positions. Kaela was moving to support him when a scavenger shot found her shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into a bulkhead. The impact drove the breath from her lungs, and she felt blood spreading through the water around her. "Kaela!" Alex's shout was followed by the distinctive whine of his weapon on full automatic. Alex surged through the glowing water like a predator, fury carved into every movement. But when he saw her drifting, bleeding, broken, the battlefield vanished from his mind. He dove, grabbed her under the arms, and dragged her to the steel platform. "Don't you dare," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You don't get to die on me. Not like this, not after what you did." She blinked slowly, lips trembling. "I told you this was suicide. You lied." He growled, "You saved me from that. Now I'm returning the lie." He ripped open the medkit with shaking hands. "You hear me, Kaela? I don't care about the odds. I don't care that this world is burning. If you die now, then every damn thing you did meant nothing." She reached up with a blood-slick hand and touched his face weakly. "You're still too loud." He barked a short, bitter laugh, even as his hands worked to stop the bleeding. "Yeah, get used to it. I'm not letting go." The remaining scavengers broke and ran, splashing toward the exit in desperate haste. Alex let them go, instead focusing entirely on sealing Kaela's wounds with synthetic skin. His expression was professional despite the tremor in his hands. Kaela's vision was blurring, but she could see the worry in his eyes. It reminded her of that first day when he'd been the one bleeding out while she made impossible choices. The symmetry was almost funny. "Turnabout," she managed to whisper before the darkness took her. She woke to find Alex tending her wounds with field medical supplies scavenged from the bunker. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he sealed the plasma burn with synthetic skin. His expression was focused and professional. "How bad?" she asked. "You'll live, but you need rest." Alex finished the bandaging and sat back on his heels. "That was stupid, staying exposed like that," says the man who charged 3 positions solo. Kaela tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Why did you do that?" Alex was quiet for a long moment. "You saved my life once. Seemed like I owed you one." They rested in the bunker for a day while Kaela recovered, taking turns on watch and sharing stories of their respective wars. Alex spoke of the early days of the conflict when both sides still believed in quick victories and clean objectives. Kaela told him about the long spiral downward, how the war had metastasized into something that consumed everything it touched. The worst part, she said during her watch, is that most of us can't even remember what we're fighting for anymore. It's just momentum inertia. The war continues because it's what we know how to do. Alex nodded in understanding. That's why it has to end, not because one side wins, but because someone decides to stop. The next phase of their journey took them through sniper country, a maze of collapsed buildings and twisted metal that provided perfect firing positions for anyone with patience and a good rifle. Alex took point, his knowledge of urban warfare keeping them alive as they picked their way through the debris. Twice they had to backtrack when he spotted glints of scoped glass among the ruins. Once they were forced to take shelter for 6 hours while a sniper duel played out between two hidden marksmen, neither side aware that their intended targets were huddled in a drainage culvert barely 50 meters away. Patience, Alex murmured as Kaela shifted restlessly. The dead have all the time in the world. The living have to be more careful. When they finally reached the edge of the sniper zone, both were exhausted and jumpy from the constant threat, but they were alive. The capital was visible in the distance, a sprawling metropolis that stretched to the horizon, its towers reaching toward the clouded sky like the spears of some giant warrior. We made it, Kaela said, allowing herself a moment of relief. Alex studied the city through his weapon scope, his expression troubled. That's not the end. That's where it gets complicated. The outskirts of the capital were a maze of checkpoints and security screens, each one designed to catch infiltrators and dissidents. Kaela had expected this. What she hadn't expected was the sheer scale of the surveillance state that had emerged during her absence. Every citizen was tracked through biometric implants, every conversation monitored by listening devices that could detect whispers from blocks away, every movement cataloged by sensors that could identify individuals by their gait patterns. The city had become a prison, beautiful, efficient, and utterly inescapable. Your people have been busy, Alex observed as they watched a checkpoint process a line of refugees. The scanner arrays were more sophisticated than anything he'd seen during his war, capable of detecting everything from weapons to elevated stress levels. Not my people, Kaela said bitterly. This is what we've become. What the war made us. She pulled up her hood, hiding her distinctive features. The ruler called it perfect order. Everything controlled, everything monitored, everything safe. They spent 2 days studying the security patterns before Kaela made her decision. There was no way to sneak into the city. The surveillance was too complete, the sensors too sophisticated. But there was another option, one that would require her to sacrifice everything she'd spent centuries building. Tim Worf einen Blick auf die Schattenfiguren, die unbeweglich und schweigsam blieben. Dies sind was, dein Babysitter? Die imperiale Schattenwatch, korrigiert Xylith, obwohl in den großen Augen ein Hoch von Belustigung lag. Sie wurden eingewiesen. AUS der Fern zu Beobachten und nur dann einzugreifen, wenn mein Sicherheit gefährdet ist. Und das ich mein mysteriosen Sandwiches teilt, lost ein Sicherheitsbedenken aus. Tim fragt, immer noch versucht die Puzzleteile zusammenzufügen. Xyliths Ohren Sancten sich leicht, was Tim inzwischen als Verlegenheit erkannt. Nicht genau. Die Imperiale Guard beobachtet unsere Interaktionen mit großem Interesse, insbesondere ihre Bereitschaft, Nahrung zu teilen, und eine Gegenleistung oder Vorteil zu erwarten. Solches Verhalten ist statistisch unwahrscheinlich. Das Teilen von Mittagessen ist statistisch unwahrscheinlich, wiederholt Tim ungläubig. Was für ein Verdreht Galaxie führen Sie diesmal? Der Lot von einem der Schattenwatchen war eindeutig ein Sichen der Missbilligung. Und Xylith hab ein klein Hand. Und die Watchverstummt sofort. In galaktischer Politik, Tim Spencer gibt es kein selbstlos Tat. Jede Gest, jedes Wort, jede geteilt Ressource birgt Impliezeit Forderungen für zukünftige Leistungen. Sie ist die Grundlage, auf der interstellar Diplomatie aufgebaut ist. Xyliths Großaugen fixierten Tim mit einer unheimlichen Intensität. Und dennoch teilten sie mir Nahrung für 7 aufeinanderfolgende Tage. Und auch nur einmal nach meinem Status, meinen Ressourcen oder meinen politischen Verbindungen zu fragen. Sie versukten nicht, unseer Interaction zu nutzen, persoonlijken Wortel zu erzielen. While das ein Arschloch move where, schlug Tim vor. While es in der imperialen Erfahrung praktisch unbekannt ist, korrigiert Xylith. Die Algorithmen, die potenziell bedrohungen die Möglichkeiten im imperialen Bereich analysieren, haben ihrem Verhalten ein Wahrscheinlichkeit zugewiesen. Die so gering ist, dass es ein automatisch Überprüfung auslässt. Also bin ich hier, weil ich ihren Bedrohungserkennungsalgorithmus durch Freundlichkeit gebrochen habe. Sie sind hier, sagt Xylith, die Ohren jetzt vollständig aufgeregt in dem, was Tim Gellern hat, als ernstes Fokus zu erkennen, weil der Imperator diese Anomalie verstehen machte. Sie werden UNS zu der imperialen Farbeglieden, wo mein Vater auf UNS Quartet. Dein Vater. Tim Stimmy brach peinlich beim zweiten Wort. Der tatsächlich Imperator der 7 Galaxien machte Michigan treffen, weil ich mein Mittagessen giedelt have. Im wesentlichen ja beste Zeit Xylith. Obwohl es Tier-Faktoren gibt, die Imperiale Garde als Wort der Untersetzung identifiziert hat, einschließlich der mysteriosen Auftauchens von irdischen Lebensmitteln in ihren Quartieren. Tim warf einen Blick auf die Lebensmittelbehalter, die nach in der Hand hielt. Ja, darüber habe ich auch nachgedacht. Den tauchen einfach auf, wenn ich nicht hinschau. Einer der Schattenwatchen trap vor UND hielt, was wie ein klein Metallinkugel aussah, die im Inneren pulsiert. Dimensional Analyze bestätigt zeitlich Storingen, die MIT verbotenen Technologien übereinstimmen, berechtigt die Watchen Durselben Gehirn Vibrations Stimmi. Tim starrt auf die Kugel, dann auf die Lebensmittel in seinen Händen. UND plötzlich fug sich ein weiters Tilde Puzzles zusammen. Wart riest jemand in der Zeit, mehr Sandwiches zu geben? Ist das überhaupt möglich? Zeitmanipulation ist in den 7 Galaxien streng reguliert. Unbefugt Nutzung wird MIT schweren Strafen belegt, erklärt Xylith. Großartig. Also habe ich nicht nur MIT Königlicher Family Mittagessen, sondern bin auch in ein Art Zeitraislieferdienst für Lebensmittel verwickelt. Tim fuhr sich MIT der Hand durch sein ständig verwuscheltes Haar, los dabei vielleicht ein klein Stück experimental Augen von den Reinigungsarbeiten der vorigen Tages. Das steht definitiv nicht im Handbuch für Advertider. Ihr Beteiligungsgeheimbereifer zu sein, versichert Xylith ihm. Der Imperator wird den vollständigen Umfang der Situation bestimmen. Wir brechen sofort auf. Beaver Tim weiter Einwand formulieren konnte, hab einer der Schattenwatchen ein Gerät, das einen lesen summenden Ton Ostius. UND die Cafeteria las sich SI hier im Auf. Es gab ein kurzes Gefühl der Schwerelosigkeit, gefolgt von dem berührenden Gefühl, en mehreren Orten gleichzeitig zu existieren. UND dann setzt sich die Realität wieder zusammen in etwas, das sehr anders war als die steril wirkenden Gange der Himmelsbahnbildungseinrichtung Delta 9. Sie standen in was wie ein enorm Rundkammer MIT wanden AUS sich während der Dunkelheit, durchsetzt MIT Lichtpunkten, die Sternkonstellationen nachahmten. Der Boden unter Tims Füßen war fest, gab aber den angenehmen Eindruck von Transparenz, offenbar was anscheinend echter Raum darunter war. Sich drehen Nebel UND fern Galaxien, die in Mustern bewegten, die zu Jordanet waren, Naderlich zu sein. Die Deck wolb sich unmöglich hoch über ihm, verschwanden Dunkelheit, die gelegentlich MIT Stummer Blitzen pulsiert. In der Mitterkammer stand was Tim Zurs für ein lebendes Sculptor hielt, ein groß Figur, die AUS dem gleichen lichtabsorbierenden Material wie die Schattenwatchen bestand, aber MIT adern AUS Luftkraft durchgehen war wie adern AUS Sternenlicht in schwarzem Marmor. Als Tim Zussa. Während sich die Figur, die Dunkelheit floss wie flüssig, was vielleicht ein Gesicht zu offenbaren. Obwohl die Zug ständig wechselten. Als werden SI versetzen, ein Form zu finden, die ein menschliches Gehirn erfassen konnte. Vater, sagt Xylith, einen Schritt vorwärts tretend MIT hochgehalten Ohren als Zeichen der Respekts. Ich präsentiere Tim Spencer von der Erde, Schüler der Himmelsbahnbildungseinrichtung Delta 9. Tim schluck schwer, plötzlich sehr bewusst seiner geknitterten Uniform. De Flex auf seinem linken Armel von den Reinigungsarbeiten de Morgens UND der Tatsache, dass noch immer die mysteriosen Lebensmittel hielt. Versucht ein Verbigung. erinnert sich wegen erden Filme. Das dies der Angemessingris war. When man adeltraf, schafft es aber nur, einen der Behalter fallen zu lassen, der auf dem nicht vollständig transparenten Boden mit einem hallenden Null Aufschlag. I'm going to turn myself in, she announced on the third morning. Alex looked up from where he'd been cleaning his equipment. Excuse me, I'm wanted as a traitor and deserter. If I surrender, they'll take me directly to the central detention facility. That's where the resistance leadership is being held. Kaela's voice was steady, but Alex could see the fear in her eyes. Once I'm inside, I can make contact with them. And I'll turn you in too. A human prisoner is too valuable to execute immediately. They'll want to interrogate you. Find out how many more like you might be out there. She paused. I'll tell them I captured you. That should buy us enough credibility to get close to the real decision makers. Alex was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to trust you with my life again. Yes, Kaela replied. And if this goes wrong, her smile was grim, then we die together. At least that's something. The plan she outlined was audacious in its simplicity. She would approach a patrol, claim to have captured a human operative, and request transport to the central facility. Once inside, she would make contact with Commander Theo, her former mentor and the unofficial leader of the moderate faction. If anyone could be convinced to listen to reason, it would be him. What about the resistance? Alex asked, assuming they existed, assuming they were willing to listen. What makes you think they can actually change anything? Because, Kaela said, checking her weapon one last time, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to remember what they're fighting for. They approached the checkpoint at midday, when the guards would be tired and eager to process routine surrenders quickly. Kaela had bound Alex's hands with restraint cables, making the capture appear legitimate to any observer. They looked like just another patrol bringing in another prisoner. The checkpoint commander was a young officer named Velter, ambitious and eager to please his superiors. He practically salivated when he saw what Kaela was bringing him, a legendary deserter and a live human prisoner, both delivered gift-wrapped. Captain of the 3rd Battalion, he said, consulting his data pad. You've been missing for quite some time. I've been hunting, Kaela replied, shoving Alex forward. This one was operating alone deep in the contested zones. Took me 3 months to track him down. Velter circled Alex like a predator examining prey. Impressive. A human operative still in original condition. He gestured to his guards. Secure the prisoner. Prepare transport to central detention. As the guards moved to comply, Alex turned to Kaela with perfectly calculated fury. You said you'd protect me, he snarled. You said. I said I'd keep you alive, Kaela interrupted, her voice cold. I never said anything about comfort. The performance was flawless. To Velter and his men, it looked like a betrayal, the human prisoner finally realizing that his captor had never intended to honor whatever bargain they'd made. The emotional pain in Alex's eyes was so convincing that Kaela almost believed it herself. The transport to central detention was an armed convoy of 3 vehicles, each one equipped with enough firepower to level a city block. Kaela and Alex were separated, placed in different vehicles to prevent any chance of coordination. As the convoy moved through the city streets, Kaela caught glimpses of the changes that had occurred during her absence. The capital had always been impressive, but now it was magnificent in the way that only totalitarian states could achieve. Every building was perfectly maintained, every street swept clean, every citizen moving with the purposeful efficiency of people who knew they were being watched. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely sterile. Central detention was a monument to paranoia, a massive complex of interconnected towers and underground levels, each one designed to be completely isolated from the others. Kaela was processed through a series of security checks that stripped away everything she'd ever been, reducing her to a number in a crime classification. They separated her from Alex immediately, leading him away to what she hoped would be an interrogation center rather than an execution chamber. She was taken in the opposite direction, toward the political detention area where enemies of the state were held. The cell they gave her was small but clean, with a narrow window that looked out over the city. Kaela sat on the simple cot and waited, knowing that her next visitor would determine whether her gamble had paid off or whether she'd just signed both their death warrants. Commander Thal arrived 6 hours later, looking older than she remembered, but still carrying himself with the rigid dignity that had made him a legend among the Valerin military. His face was carefully neutral as he entered the cell, but Kaela could see the mixture of disappointment and relief in his eyes. "Kaela," he said simply. "Commander," she stood, offering the formal salute she'd given him 1,000 times during her training. "I've come to make a proposal." "You're in no position to make proposals," Thal said. "You're a deserter and a traitor. Your capture of the human operative is noted, but it doesn't erase 2 centuries of crimes against the state." Kaela didn't flinch. "The human operative has a name. It's Alex, and he's not my prisoner. He's my ally." Thal's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a deadly softness. "I trained you to wield a blade without hesitation. I taught you that mercy was a weakness." He took a step closer, rage barely restrained. "And you used that training to betray your people. You handed your blade to the enemy." Kaela stared at him, wounded but unbroken. "No, I didn't hand it to the enemy. I handed it to the only one willing to carry it beside me when everyone else had forgotten what it was for." The silence between them stretched like a wire. Finally, Thal looked away, and in that moment, Kaela saw what he was hiding. Not anger, but exhaustion, fear. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. The hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, then stopped as the implication sank in. "You're confessing to treason," he said. "I'm confessing to hope." Kaela met his gaze steadily. "Commander, how many more years? How many more generations? When does it end?" The war was quiet for a long moment. "When we win," he said finally. "We can't win, not the way we're fighting now. The humans can't win either. We're locked in a death spiral that ends with both species extinct." Kaela stepped closer. "But there's another way. Surrender. Partnership." Kaela pulled out a data chip she'd concealed during processing. "Everything's on here: human tactical doctrines, technological capabilities, strategic objectives. Alex gave it to me freely because he believes the war can end without genocide." Thal stared at the chip, as if it were a venomous snake. "Why would he do that?" "Because I saved his life once when I should have killed him. Because sometimes the right choice is the stupid choice." Kaela held out the chip. "Because he understands that survival isn't the same thing as victory." Before Thal could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed the corridor in pulsing red, and Kaela could hear the sound of running feet and shouted orders. "What's happening?" she asked. Thal's expression was grim as he activated his communicator. "Control, this is Commander Thal. Report." The response was garbled with static, but the essential information came through clearly enough. The Outer Colony fleet had launched a massive assault on the capital's orbital defenses. The city was under siege, and this time there would be no negotiated withdrawal. "It started," Thal said, his voice heavy with resignation. "The final battle." Kaela felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How long do we have?" 6 hours, maybe 8, Thal replied. Kaela looked at the data chip in her hand. "Whatever you're proposing, it's too late." "No," Kaela said firmly. "It's exactly the right time. The only time when people might be desperate enough to listen to reason." The central detention facility became a fortress within hours. Emergency protocols transformed the administrative complex into a military command center, with defensive positions on every level and communication arrays that linked it to the broader defense network. Kaela found herself in the strange position of being both prisoner and advisor. Her tactical expertise was too valuable to ignore, despite her status as a traitor. Commander Thal had made the decision to trust her, at least provisionally. The data chip she provided contained human intelligence that could make the difference between victory and annihilation, and he was pragmatic enough to use whatever advantages he could find. "The human prisoner," Thal said as they studied orbital tracking displays in the command center. "Alex, I want to question him." "He'll cooperate," Kaela said, "but not under torture. He's a soldier, not a fanatic." Thal nodded curtly and gave the orders. Within minutes, Alex was brought to the command center under heavy guard. He looked tired but unharmed, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the tactical displays and the organized chaos of a military headquarters under siege. "Quite a show," he said, looking up at the orbital bombardment patterns being tracked on the main screen. "The outer colonies don't mess around when they decide to end something. You know their capabilities." "Thal said it wasn't a question." "Better than you do," Alex replied, studying the commander with the same analytical intensity he'd applied to battlefield situations. "The question is whether you want to fight them or stop them." Alex moved to the tactical display, his bound hands not preventing him from pointing to specific formations. "This isn't an invasion fleet. It's an extermination fleet. They're not planning to occupy the planet. They're planning to sterilize it." The implications hit the command center like a physical blow. Several officers began speaking at once, their voices rising in protest and disbelief. "They'll silence them with a gesture," Alex continued. "The orbital platforms they're targeting aren't just military installations. They're atmospheric processors, water treatment facilities, power generation stations, everything necessary to sustain life on this planet." He turned to face Thal directly. "They've decided that coexistence is impossible, so they're going to remove one of the variables from the equation." Kaela felt her blood turn to ice. "How long?" 72 hours from the start of bombardment, maybe less if they use the heavy ordnance. Alex's voice was matter-of-fact, the tone of a professional delivering unwelcome news. "After that, this planet becomes uninhabitable for anything larger than bacteria." The silence in the command center was deafening. Kaela could see the officers processing the information, their faces reflecting the same mixture of horror and disbelief that she felt. They'd all known the war was escalating, but none of them had imagined it would come to this. "There has to be something," Thal said finally. "Some way to stop them." "There is," Alex said quietly, "but you're not going to like it." He outlined the plan with the same clinical precision he'd used to describe the bombardment. The outer colony fleet was massive and well defended, but it had one critical vulnerability. Its command and control systems were centralized in a single battleship. If that ship could be disabled or destroyed, the entire fleet would lose coordination and effectiveness. Getting to it would require inside knowledge of their protocols and security systems, Alex continued. Someone would have to get close enough to plant charges in exactly the right locations. "Someone human," Kaela said, understanding immediately. "Someone expendable," Alex corrected. "This is a suicide mission. Whoever goes doesn't come back." Thal studied the tactical projections, his expression thoughtful. "What would you need?" "A fast ship, stealth capabilities, and a crew that understands they're not coming home." Alex paused. "And authorization from someone with enough authority to make the outer colonies listen." "I don't have that kind of authority," Thal admitted. "But the council does." Kaela said, "The council is in session right now. Emergency meetings have been going on for 6 hours, but they're divided and time is running out." Kaela made her decision. "I need to speak to them. You're a wanted traitor. They'll arrest you on sight," Thal said. "Then I'll have to make them listen before they do," Kaela replied. Kaela turned to Alex. "Are you willing to do this? To sacrifice yourself for a planet that isn't even your home?" Alex was quiet for a long moment. 250 years ago, you saved my life when you should have killed me. You betrayed everything you believed in because you thought there might be a better way." He met her gaze. "Maybe it's time I return the favor." The journey to the council chambers took them through corridors that had become impromptu triage centers and ammunition depots. The detention facility was transforming itself into a last-stand fortress, with every available person pressed into service. Children carried ammunition, elderly civilians operated communication equipment, and wounded soldiers propped themselves up to man defensive positions. The council was in continuous session, their voices rising and falling in heated debate as they argued over evacuation procedures and defensive strategies. Kaela could hear them through the sealed doors, desperate voices grappling with impossible choices. "This is madness," Thal muttered as they approached the entrance. "They'll never listen." "They'll listen," Kaela said grimly, "because they don't have any other choice." The guards at the council chamber recognized Thal and admitted them without question, though their eyes lingered suspiciously on Kaela and Alex. Inside, the circular chamber was chaos. Dozens of council members shouting over each other while tactical displays showed the steady deterioration of their defensive positions. At the center of it all sat Premier Kadesh, the young hardliner who had risen to power on promises of total victory. He was younger than Kaela had expected, his features sharp with the kind of fanatical certainty she'd seen in too many young officers over the centuries. Premier Kadesh, Thou called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. I have critical intelligence about the enemy assault. Kadesh looked up, his eyes immediately focusing on Kaela. Commander Thou, you will remove that traitor from these chambers immediately. With respect, Premier, you need to hear what she has to say, Thou replied. I need nothing from a deserter and betrayer of our people, Kadesh gestured to the guards. Arrest them both. Before the guards could move, Alex stepped forward. Premier Kadesh, he said, his voice carrying the authority of command despite his restraints. My name is Alex Reeves, formerly of the Human Colonial Defense Force. I have information about the outer colony fleet that could save your people. The council chamber fell silent. Kadesh stared at Alex as if he were seeing a ghost, which in a way he was. A relic from the early days of the war when the conflict had seemed manageable and winnable. A human, Kadesh said slowly, in our most secure facility. I surrendered myself, Alex said, because I believe this war can still be stopped. For the next 20 minutes, Alex laid out everything he knew about the outer colony fleet and their intentions. He explained the timeline, the targeting priorities, and the devastating finality of what was about to happen. The council listened in growing horror as the full scope of the threat became clear. 72 hours, Premier Kadesh repeated when Alex finished. You're certain? As certain as anyone can be about military operations, Alex replied. The outer colonies have decided that partial victory isn't enough. They want to eliminate the Valerin species entirely. The chamber erupted in renewed arguments, but this time the tone was different. Fear had replaced ideology as the primary motivator, and even the most hardline members were beginning to understand that traditional victory was no longer possible. What do you propose? Kadesh asked finally. Alex outlined his plan again, this time with Kaela adding tactical details about Valerin capabilities and resources. It was desperate and dangerous, with minimal chances of success, but it was the only option that didn't end with planetary extinction. You're asking us to trust our entire future to a single human operative, one council member objected. You're asking us to trust it to someone who has no reason to care whether our species survives, another added. Alex looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. You're right. I have no reason to care about your species, but I have every reason to care about ending this war. He paused. And I have someone who saved my life once when she should have killed me. Maybe that's reason enough. The vote was close, 7 in favor, 5 against, with 3 abstentions. But it was enough. Premier Kadesh authorized the mission, providing Alex with access to their fastest courier ship and a skeleton crew of volunteers. As the meeting broke up, Kaela found herself alone with Alex in a side chamber. The weight of what was about to happen hung between them like a physical presence. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Yes, I do. Alex checked his equipment one final time. 250 years ago, you made a choice that saved my life. Now I get to make a choice that might save everyone else's. Kaela wanted to say something profound, something that would capture the magnitude of what he was sacrificing. Instead, she simply nodded. If this works, Alex said as the mission crew arrived to escort him to the launch bay, remember that wars don't end because one side wins. They end because someone decides to stop fighting. The courier ship launched under cover of an artillery barrage, its stealth systems masking its signature among the defensive fire. Kaela watched from the command center as the tiny vessel disappeared into the chaos of orbital combat, carrying Alex toward what they all knew was certain death. The next 18 hours were the longest of Kaela's life. The outer colony bombardment continued with methodical precision, systematically destroying the infrastructure that kept the planet habitable. Atmospheric processors went dark one by one, power grids failed in cascading blackouts, and the very air began to taste of poison as chemical weapons spread through the upper atmosphere. In the detention facility, now transformed into the de facto capital of a dying world, The defenders held their positions and waited for word from Alex's mission. Communication with the courier ship had been lost 6 hours after launch when it had penetrated the outer perimeter of the enemy fleet. Kaela found herself pacing the command center like a caged animal, unable to focus on anything but the tactical displays that showed their steadily deteriorating position. Commander Thal had given her an official position as tactical advisor, but there was little advice to give. They were fighting a holding action against extinction itself. Any word? Premier Kadesh asked, appearing beside her at the main display. Nothing, Kaela replied. The mission timeline called for 18 hours from launch to target. We should know something soon. Kadesh nodded, his young face marked by exhaustion and stress. I've been thinking about what your human friend said about ending wars by deciding to stop fighting. I'm not sure I understand the difference between that and surrender. Kaela considered the question. Surrender means one side loses everything. Deciding to stop fighting means both sides choose to find another way. She gestured at the displays showing the orbital bombardment. This isn't victory for anyone. It's just mutual annihilation with different timing. Before Kadesh could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility, but these weren't the steady wails of incoming bombardment. These were the rapid pulses that indicated communication from an outside source. Incoming transmission, the communications officer reported. Source unknown, but it's using outer colony encryption protocols. Put it through, Kadesh ordered. The voice that filled the command center was crisp and professional, with the slight accent that marked outer colony naval officers. This is Admiral Morrison aboard the ONS Retribution. To whom am I speaking? Kadesh stepped forward. This is Premier Kadesh of the Valerin Council. Admiral, your fleet is conducting an unprovoked assault on civilian targets, Kadesh said. I'm going to cut through the diplomatic nonsense because we don't have time for it. Morrison's voice was tight with stress. 20 minutes ago, someone infiltrated my flagship and attempted to destroy our command and control systems. The saboteur was killed, but not before delivering a message. Kaela felt her heart stop. Alex, she whispered. The message was simple, Morrison continued. Stop the bombardment or lose the entire fleet. The saboteur, a human operative, had provided detailed intelligence about their defensive vulnerabilities and tactical protocols. He had also made it clear that he was operating with the full cooperation of Valerin Command. The silence in the command center was absolute. Kaela could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as the implications sank in. Admiral, Kadesh said carefully, what exactly are you proposing? A ceasefire, Morrison replied without hesitation. Immediate cessation of hostilities while we figure out what the hell is actually happening here. Because if a human operative can get close enough to my flagship to plant explosives, then every assumption we've made about this war needs to be reconsidered. Kaela closed her eyes, feeling tears she hadn't shed in decades threatening to spill over. Alex had done it, not by destroying the fleet, but by proving that cooperation between species was possible. His sacrifice had become something else entirely, a demonstration that the war could end without apocalypse. Terms? Kadesh asked. Simple, Morrison replied. Both sides pull back to minimum safe distances. Both sides send representatives to neutral territory for direct negotiations. And both sides acknowledge that whatever we've been fighting about, it's not worth sterilizing an entire planet. The vote to accept the ceasefire was unanimous. 3 weeks later, Kaela stood in the same cave where she'd hidden Alex 2.5 centuries earlier. The cryopod was still there, its systems humming with dormant power. But now, instead of preserving a life, it would preserve a memory. She placed her old armor inside the chamber, the same armor she'd worn on that battlefield so long ago when she'd made the choice that had led to this moment. The metal was scarred and dented, marked by centuries of conflict, but it still gleamed with the pride and purpose of a warrior who had finally found peace. I'm done being their weapon, she said to the empty chamber. If I fall again, let it not be as a soldier. Alex stood beside her, his presence both impossible and inevitable. The mission to the outer colony flagship had succeeded in ways no one had anticipated, not just in stopping the bombardment, but in proving that cooperation was possible. The sabotage attempt had been carefully planned to fail, designed to demonstrate trust rather than inflict damage. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, watching as she sealed the armor inside the pod. "I've been fighting for so long that I'd forgotten what I was fighting for," Kaela replied. "Now I remember. It wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about the chance to choose something better." They walked out of the cave together, leaving the past buried in crystalline preservation behind them. The sound of machinery indicated that other chambers were being opened, other sleepers awakening. The cave system was filled with emergency shelters from the early days of the war, containing soldiers from both species who had been preserved against a future that might never come. That future had arrived, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of a final battle, there would be a final choice: the decision to stop fighting and start building something new. The first of the awakened soldiers emerged as they reached the cave mouth, a grizzled Valerin sergeant whose scars told the story of decades of combat. He blinked in the morning light, disoriented and confused, until his gaze fell on Alex. Velkoz had been there during the convergence battles, had lost his entire squad to human orbital strikes. The hatred in his eyes as he looked at Alex was as fresh as the day he'd entered Cryosleep. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the three of them stood frozen in tableau, former enemies separated by centuries of war and pain. Then slowly, Velkoz stepped forward, his scarred hand extended toward Alex, trembling with the effort of a choice that went against every instinct he'd ever developed. "I don't forgive," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't forget, but I met Alex's eyes directly. Maybe I can choose to build instead of destroy." Alex looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Kaela could see the conflict in his face. This was a soldier who had probably killed his friends, destroyed his home, shattered his world. But then, with the same quiet courage that had made him volunteer for a suicide mission, Alex reached out and clasped Velko's hand. "Neither do I," Alex said simply. More soldiers emerged from the caves, humans and Valerins who had been preserved in the hope of better days. They organized themselves into work crews and construction teams. Former enemies were now united by the simple desire to rebuild rather than destroy. Alex took Kaela's hand as they watched the awakening army spread out across the horizon, carrying tools instead of weapons. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd fought for: the possibility that former enemies could become partners, that cycles of violence could be broken. "What if they start again?" Alex said quietly, his voice thoughtful. "What if the next generation forgets what this cost?" Kaela didn't answer right away. From the hilltop, she pointed to the field where reconstruction had begun. Near the base of a damaged processor, two children played. One Valerin, skin the color of dusk, and one human, barefoot and grinning. They were using scrap metal like swords, pretending to duel. Neither seemed to care about skin, bloodlines, or history, just movement, play, life. "Then we remind them," Kaela said. "Not with monuments, not with stories of blood and vengeance, but with choices, the same choices we made." She turned to Alex, her voice steady. "We show them that peace isn't a victory. It's a habit, a promise you make again and again until it becomes who you are." Kaela looked out over the scarred landscape, watching human and Valerin engineers working side by side to repair atmospheric processors in the distance. She could see more children from both species playing together in the ruins, the first generation in centuries to grow up knowing their former enemies as neighbors instead of monsters. "Then we choose again," she continued, squeezing his hand gently. "Every day, every moment, every time hatred seems easier than hope, we choose to stop." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the morning light. "That's what peace is, Alex, not the absence of war, but the choice to build something better, made new every single day." They walked away from the cave together, their footsteps echoing across the ash-covered landscape. Behind them, the awakening army spread out across the horizon, carrying the tools of creation instead of destruction. The war was over. The future had begun. And in the simple act of choosing to trust instead of hate, they had discovered that the most powerful weapon against war was not victory, but the courage to stop fighting.